Hey everybody, welcome to the
Hey, welcome.
organizational effectiveness show. It
Kind
used to
of
be an
like
agile
here's
thing.
this agile thing.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like it used to be an agile thing. Now it actually grew in scope and effectiveness. Welcome to TOES, the TOE show. We're still working it out. My name's Matt Beam.
I'm Mike Markey.
I'm Jeff Singleton.
I'm
And-
Marcelo Lopez.
Junior.
And
then there's
that
also
is
a Rick
Rick's
Waters.
chair. That's Rick's
Yes.
chair right over there.
Those are really good the headphones. I just want to say those look like the K7s or something. Those are really good. So Rick will be joining us. He's had some audio difficulties, kind of.
Yeah.
So
So he'll be joining us
Yeah, so-
somewhat.
So you may
So
see
we're
him.
here-
You may see he's been crawling all over his desk trying to solve this audio issue.
This is how you know that the show actually is live, because we would not have left this in the edit.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're here to talk about dysfunction mapping.
I feel
Not
like
even
we're
sure.
experiencing dysfunction right now.
We should map this. So Rick and Marcelo have a class that they teach, and it's available for, I think, the public and or your corporate thing, if you want to join them, if you want to come in and do it privately.
Yep.
But I noticed that they were doing this recently, and I was like, I've heard of that, but I don't know what it is. So I invited them to come in and explain, what is dysfunction mapping? What can I do with it? How does it help? It feels like I've experienced a fair amount of dysfunction in my life, and especially in a corporate setting, and could be very useful. So I was hoping you guys could give us an overview and some examples and go from there.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. In a nutshell, because actually earlier this week, Jeff wonked me over the head and says, "What is it actually good for?" And I was like, semi snarkily answering back, said, "What do we do root cause analysis for? What do we do causal analysis for? Why do we assess how things are going? And it's simply put in that, if we were going to look at as a where do we categorize it in the world of things, like we do flora and fauna, we would categorize it under the category of causal analysis and root cause analysis. In that part of the I'm drawing an absolute blank. The animal kingdom, if there were an animal kingdom of agile, if there were an animal kingdom of work, we would classify it
taxonomy?
under that. Huh?
A taxonomy?
A taxonomy. Thank you for that word, because I was just like really drawing a blank there at that moment. And what a word to draw a blank on, right?
What a word. So
Yeah.
I was looking at it earlier. I was looking at dysfunction mapping. It kind of looks like a current reality tree. We've talked in this show over the past month about Eli Goldrat's thinking process tools. And the current reality tree seems like it was sort of the same kind of, related at least, or for a similar purpose. I see Rick nodding, I think.
Yeah.
Well, it's sort of like a current reality tree, but the current reality tree tells you where you are and maybe even why you're there. Dysfunction mapping helps you understand, hey, what are all the hypotheses? What are all the possible solutions that we can come up with for this? I'm not going to even say dysfunction. I'm going to use a word that we're more familiar with, and that is impediment, or more properly, an organizational impediment. Those types of impediments that are pesky, they stay around for a long time. No one likes to really address them that much. It helps us understand what possible solutions we have in front of us, and this is where we all get in trouble. We don't just say this solution is the solution. It's a hypothetical solution. It's a hypothesis. We don't know for sure that this solution is actually going to fix our problem. So how do we measure its success? And we even go into, I don't know, Marcelo, if you've ever counted like 2-3 dozen types of measurements that we can take to see if we're actually succeeding with this solution. And if we're not, if that solution doesn't work, what are all the other hypotheses that we came up with in the process?
Yeah. And
Awesome.
The interesting thing about it is that when you form a plan around it, once you've run through creating a dysfunction map, you actually come up with something that you own that's actionable. And what's interesting that we found over running this class, these sessions, is that people always say, so how do I know that things are better, Matt? How do I know things are better? Well, the point is that not everything is one of those wonderful KPIs that project management loves, like, did I reduce my cycle time? Well, maybe that's not really the thing that matters measuring. Maybe it's the number of interruptions that are happening, the number of disruptions that are happening on a daily or weekly basis for everybody. They're somewhat qualitative, but they can be quantified, okay? And the thing is that this thing that you think that you want to measure is really only secondary to the thing that's causing that to be not what you would like. Does that make sense? And so sometimes
it makes total sense. And it seems to dovetail with the broader discussion we've been having in the Agile industry, which is who broke Agile, right? It's sort of like
opening up
it's
that
not
rabbit
clear.
hole early, are we?
Well, I mean, it sounds like what this is doing is it's giving us more confidence that we understand the root cause of what's causing the organization and not get the outcomes that they're aiming for. Is that a fair?
I would say that's a fair assessment. I'll refer back to what we kind of have as the catchphrase. Okay, dysfunction mapping is an empirical tool that helps any practitioner. I mean, yeah, in the marketing material it says agile practitioners, but I've always posited that we could use this tool for almost anyone. Okay, for almost anyone. I piloted at a prior employer of this, or an early form of this, with a group that was in their corporate risk management area when they were fleshing out some ideas that had to do with their governance and risk and compliance controls. Why are these controls not giving us the kind of compliance factor back that we want? And so we used an early form of dysfunction mapping at this particular place to kind of ferret out what their thinking was and see how they came up with a hypothesis to change the risk control framework to better suit their compliance profile.
Because risk was the kind of thing they were trying to reduce, and the compliance framework was the current thing that they had, and you helped.
In a sense, they wanted to be more resilient at being auditable. This is a financial institution. You know, OCC shows up whenever the heck they want. Does whatever they want, and so they wanted to be more resilient if and when an audit were to occur. Who can blame them?
Seems reasonable. Yeah.
Who can blame them? So that's kind of the marketing speak. It's an empirical approach that somebody can use to create a hypothesis on what do we want to do to make something better.
Yeah, totally.
So what distinguishes dysfunction mapping from your run-of-the-mill risk management?
What distinguishes it?
Yes.
I would say the structure of the framework that we've hit upon. Okay, because speaking for myself, I had my grow your own framework for this kind of stuff. I called it reverse brainstorming. We've all tried that kind of stuff before. Okay, what's not working? Well, flip that. What things are contributing for that not happening? Okay, what can you act on that would cause that to not happen, and then keep going down that way? Sounds kind of 5Y-ish, but in a different format. Okay, but in a different format. I called it reverse brainstorming. And then when I first came upon the structure of it that Mike Lloyd had come up with, I go, this makes it more approachable. Because the way that I was doing it, I could do it that way because it's Marcelo coaching you through it. Until I had been with you several times for you to practice it out, I got feedback from some of the Scrum Masters that I work with is, my goodness, I'm glad you were there with me that entire time, Marcelo, because it took me a while to get the practice. And I go, well, it's because it's meant to be done collaboratively. You're not supposed to do this by yourself. Okay? There be dragons in here. And that kind of follows up with dysfunction mapping, Mike, because that you could come into a workshop learn how to use this framework and this tool. But then what do? Well, you're not meant to hang on to it. You're meant to share it. You're meant to learn enough of it that you can go try it yourself with people on your team. Okay? Which is one of the reasons why in a private setting it seems to have worked out well there, because they hone in on the fact that we own this. Okay? That's one of the key takeaways with 5 Whys, Ishikawa. There's always the, okay, who owns this, Matt? Who owns this? Who owns this action that we could take? Well, you made the map. You own it.
So how does it work?
Is that like a whoever smelt it dealt it kind of thing? It's like
kind of sorta, but it could be that when you're working through the symptoms and what the potential solutions are, that the person who most feels the symptoms, okay, is not the person who can most act on taking action on the solution, and therefore you got to do this. Okay?
Okay.
And basically, if I were going to say in a nutshell, how does it work is, what's not working that should be working? Start with that. What's not working that should be working? I don't want to say, what needs to be better, what's working well. What's not working that should be working? And it's a very broad question. And it's meant to be broad. Okay? It's meant to be broad because the thing is that a lot of folks carry around this notion of, I feel discomfort, but they can't quite put a name to it. And so dysfunction mapping kind of forces you in a position to give a name to it.
Do you recommend that you start at the team level or the team of teams or the program? Do you go top down? Do you go bottom up? Do you start in the middle? Is there any sort of preferred approach by that? Or is it just a completely open question about what's not working?
It's a completely open question from my perspective. I've talked a whole lot, so I'm just going to shut up. And Rick, are you comfortable taking on this one?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a where do you start, at what level of the organization do you start. It's everyone at every level of the organization should be thinking about what doesn't feel right here, what doesn't work right here. All of us here, all 5 of us here, we've all been agile coaches at one point or another, right? One of the first things that an agile coach will say they do when they enter into a new organization or a new sub-organization of the company, anytime they enter into that space, what's the first thing that they would textbook say? I'm going to observe, right?
Totally, yeah.
One of the first things that you start observing are the things that don't feel right, the things that don't look right, because of your standard. And by your standard, what I mean is, let's say they're doing Scrum here on this team. Let's say we're at the team level. They're doing Scrum on this team, so-called Scrum. You come in and you see, well, yeah, they call it the daily Scrum or the daily stand-up, but they only do it 3 times a week.
they're sitting.
Or either it takes an hour or it's all over Slack, even though they're all either within 5 feet of each other or, other points of the globe. These, the fact that they're breaking a rule of Scrum, that starts you thinking there's a problem here, and it might not just be they're only doing the daily Scrum 3 times a week, right? This is where we start. We start with the small things that we start observing. And then we say, okay, well, is it really just a rule of Scrum that they're breaking? Why are they doing that? And yes, we can get into the 5 Whys here. I said 5 Wives. The 5 Whys. Hopefully we're not getting into 5 Whys.
That's way too complicated.
But you could go down the route of saying, okay, well, why do you only do it 3 times a week? We're not actually going to suggest doing that. We're going to suggest saying, what are all the other things that you're observing as well? Look globally. What you're looking at with the 3-day-a-week daily Scrum, that's a symptom. Think in terms of going to the doctor. This is a symptom probably of a larger problem. I have a fever. Okay, there's a million reasons why you could have a fever. Let's start looking at all the other symptoms you have. Well, I have a sore throat. Okay, well, now I'm thinking ear, nose, and throat. What other problems do you have? Well, my ear hurts. Oh, okay, maybe now it's an ear infection. And now we can start really honing in. We're going to do this same thing in dysfunction mapping. What are all the problems that we're seeing, and are they all sort of stemming from the same centralized problem?
So it kind of doesn't matter where you start because everything's connected to everything else. And if you keep running the process, you'll map those connections and you'll figure out the overall. And then you can make a strategy about what to do about it once you've got the full picture, once it's mapped. Is that fair?
At this point, it sounds like you're truly just talking about symptoms. You want to talk about what the problems look like or what they feel like, how they're affecting things. Rather than, I can imagine a world in which you might ask someone, what isn't working around here, and have them come back at you with a solution instead of defining the problem. Like they have something in their head.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
When I've run elsewhere at podcasts not to be named in this podcast, a dysfunction mapping in an hour kind of a thing. Okay, just a taste of it in your mouth. And I ask part of that little run through is ask the question you just asked, Mike. It's just tell me what's not working. You know, I mean, sometimes I throw a little bit of appreciative inquiry at the beginning and, hey, what's working for you guys? What's giving you some joy at work? And I let people get into the mindset of discussing work first before then I throw the I'll call it the Marky question from now on is what's just not working? And have it just broadly throw out there and let them talk about commonly what do they find that isn't working across whoever's here, because that's as far as you can go, Matt. Is whoever's here. So if Jeff's not
like a
here,
retro.
If Jeff's not here, we can't benefit from what he's bringing to the table if he's not part of that conversation. But he comes in, and now, okay, he could respond back to something that you and I think that is absolutely huge, and come back with not necessarily a solution, but a different perspective that says, well, you know, maybe it's not as big of a not working as the stuff that Mike brought to the table. And it changes the perspective. So part of it is to get people talking about it together in a shared context. Does that make sense? And part of framing the different parts to dysfunction mapping that particular way helps everybody kind of guide themselves along with everyone else together. Okay? So once you get talking about what's just not working, then you can ask the question about, well, maybe a little bit about some why behind it, but what's it keeping you from accomplishing that you would want? And that we start to kind of direct them towards the purpose that they find that what's not working is keeping them from accomplishing them. And so now you've started to put together some pieces to the map. Okay?
So I'm curious, because, I mean, this sounds very familiar in situations that we've been in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times in retrospectives, you know, this sort of thing, the sort of issues and impediments that will arise. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that seems to always get in the way, the impediment for uncovering impediments, is the environmental distrust, is what I'm going to call it. When you are trying to function in an environment that inherently does not have a high level of trust, everybody plays their cards very close to the vest, and so there's less opportunities for honesty to come out. And so I'm curious how you flesh that out and get beyond that.
Let's be pretty clear here. Now I've heard Matt and Jeff both say retrospective. So let's be clear. This is not a new retrospective. This is not a new retrospective technique. Even though you see these techniques in retrospectives, you're not going to get through a single map in a retrospective. I don't care how long your retrospective is. It will take you probably days to get through a map. This is why we teach the course over, even though the course is only 8 hours, instruction time is only 8 hours, we do it over a 2-day period because we want you to go home after 4 hours. We want you to think about everything. come back the next day fresh, and let's finish out a map, because we're actually mapping out problems in the class. So even though, yeah, you're going to use retrospective or you're going to use this as your retrospective technique, you can't solve, like I was saying earlier, organizational impediments at the team level. You're going to have to include people at many different levels to solve problems like that, Jeff. If you have a distrustful environment, you can't solve distrust at the level that they feel distrust. It has to be at least one level higher, right? So we should probably be addressing problems like that up there. Something that I do use in retrospectives all the time, and I'm still facilitating retrospectives today, and that is when we get to the part of the retrospective when we try to figure out which problem have we already talked about that we actually want to try to make better, which one of all of these problems that we've discussed can we actually have an impact in? Why spend the rest of our retrospective, trying to map out a problem or map out a solution if we don't have the authority or influence to change that thing? So don't waste your time.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that's actually one of the secrets for how I got to run this as a taste in an hour. I actually will actively disencourage for them to go squirrel, okay, and go all that sort of directions. I'll say you guys need to do a little bit of decisioning here of what Rick said. Which ones of these do you think actually are that's weird, actually actionable? Which ones of these are actually actionable? And I actively encourage them to focus on what they can take action on. That's one of the clear things about this that I think sets it apart from other approaches that may seem like this, is that it tries to actively incentivize arriving at something that you can take action on, something that you can determine, you can measure some way, even if you're totally wrong, Matt, because we are often wrong in how we measure things, but at least we thought we could measure this, and we thought that it might teach us something, okay? And then on top of that, what can we do to make sure that if it wasn't measurable, if it wasn't actionable, that we can come back around and iterate to it? Okay? Because one of the caps on the bottle that I put on it is, how soon do you want to iterate this? How soon do you want to come back and revisit this and see if it's actually showing you any appreciable difference?
Okay.
So if the thing that hurts the most is the thing that you can't fix, you will still set it aside, and because you'll find some way to get a path to the person who can fix it, but you would, okay. But you want to focus first on things that are in your span of control.
You may do that. It is possible for you to go to low-hanging fruit. You're correct, okay? But here's the silver lining to that, Matt. The point is, remember, you grow the most by doing, learning by doing. Actually practicing this approach will build up those muscles, okay, that you will start to think of things this particular way, okay? You will see things that are not working and actively considering in your own internal decision tree, if you will, okay? And if you're practicing it collaboratively with your teammates, we'll be able to have conversations about this like this and actively assess things as they go along.
Okay, so up until this point, I've heard you guys talk about looking for symptoms to problems. I've heard the word dysfunction bandied about very briefly. I heard trying to figure out what the purpose that you're trying to achieve, but your dysfunctions are keeping you from achieving that purpose. And then through the conversation, you ended up talking about ways you could measure success. It's called dysfunction mapping. I assume there's a map somewhere in this conversation. Right now, it's just a bunch of stuff.
I'm literally looking at a map right now.
So, okay.
I'm not only literally looking at a map, I'm actually looking at one of the past workshops.
So do you want to, for the benefit of the folks who may have never seen a dysfunction map, can you kind of describe what this looks like as you go through it?
Do you want to throw something up there, Rick, or do you want me to?
I can show what I actually use in class.
Let's do it.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. This is prettier than mine. I'll admit that. I have no shame.
And it actually lets me choose which one to share. That's awesome. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
Oh, how that's so weird. We were looking at the same one.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So if we start over here on the right, and I know everyone wants to read left to right. The reason we start over on the right-hand side is for a very simple psychological reason. It slows you down. You're used to going left to right. We want you to slow down, work right to left. So, again, it's all about observation. It says what negative outcomes can be observed or heard if you're eavesdropping, which, coaching, we do that. We've got lots of unfinished work in each sprint. New work is constantly pushed mid-sprint. The team shows unfinished work at review. Daily Scrum overruns every single day. Well, what good practice, moving from all of these symptoms that are sort of all collected together, sort of affinity grouped. Does that make me sound more important? We've got the same central theme or topic here. If we move over one column to the left, we're asking what missing good practice might cause all of these symptoms, and you might come up with more than one dysfunction. You might come up with 3 or 4 dysfunctions just for one symptom on the right hand side. It's a many to many situation here. But what we came up with here is the product owner doesn't attend sprint planning. This could account for not just these symptoms, but lots of other symptoms that aren't even showing here. And this is just one thing. It is a rule in Scrum that the product owner must show up for sprint planning. So what good practice or what rule is being broken that might be causing these types of symptoms? We're looking now for rules, and really big air quotes around the word rules. What rules are being broken? So we start taking a look at that. Once we've figured out what one of the possible dysfunctions could be for these symptoms, we take a step to the left. And, Mike was very deliberate about the use of the word purpose here, hopefully, because that is the next column. Why is the missing practice potentially valuable? So why is the product owner showing up at sprint planning important? Why is it valuable? Well, the product owner represents the customer and is accountable for the value of the work. One of the rules or accountabilities in Scrum right now, and I really want to underscore right now because it's hopefully going to change soon, the product owner is supposed to maximize or be accountable for maximizing the value of the work done by the developers, right? So we take that purpose, it might change.
I'm super curious about that, but I don't want to interrupt you. Please go ahead.
Well, we never know what Ken and Jeff are going to do next, right?
Yeah.
So, in November of 2020, I'm going to say several of us trainers were caught by surprise by the wording in the Scrum Guide. So,
yeah,
that's why I say
it
might
might change though if the product owner is not. Again, I don't know. This is a rabbit hole we want to go down. Let's parking lot that. As
Okay.
we say,
and let's not go too far afield either. That happens to be one purpose of several that was chosen.
The product owner is
sense?
accountable.
Yeah. In other words, okay, there are different purposes for the product owner being valuable, being in the sprint planning event. Can we agree on that? There's several purposes for why it's valuable for that person to be there. Rick happens to be showing a card that the people who built this map chose out of the different purposes for the product owner to be there that they found most important to them.
So the system of delivery that Scrum is could change, but the dysfunction mapping wouldn't necessarily change because you're just talking about you're not just, but you're starting at the dysfunction, you're figuring out why, and you figure out what action. Like you could be doing this with Kanban, you could be doing it with anything. Okay.
Now you gone and done it, because now you've spoiled
That's my
it.
job, is to go and do it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you
Now
also
you've
said you
spoiled
start
it.
with dysfunction, and you don't. You start with symptom, and you work your way to dysfunction.
Well, yeah.
Thank
So,
you.
so the
That's all I can see on the
story
screen,
part is that you're absolutely correct, Matt. I've been doing slowly, snail's pace, but I've been doing a little bit of mapping to this stuff, to the Kanban method, to the principles and practices of Kanban, and you could just as easily pull out Scrum, replace Kanban, and you would end up with similar kinds of conversations with different purposes showing up. Different dysfunction. You could even come up with similar dysfunctions, but that aren't meeting a certain purpose. Okay, and then on top of that, again, because it's not either or, why couldn't it be Kanban stuff that you cite as a purpose, and some Scrum stuff that you also cite as a purpose, because you're finding the mixing of the two useful to you.
Well, not to get stoned for saying this, but this could apply to any delivery, even a waterfall delivery. Right?
That's my assumption.
Yep.
I just wanted to check that assumption.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Sorry, Rick. I didn't mean to derail.
Yeah, we don't want to single out Scrum as being a problem child or a target of dysfunction mapping, right?
No, it's just the very first version of dysfunction mapping that came out was focused on Scrum. The very next one that came out was Kanban. Now it's going to leadership. We're trying to find those sets of rules that get broken all of the time in many different, let's call it, work management systems. Okay.
Yeah.
Any approaches, practices, processes, methodologies, frameworks, whatever you want to call them, any way that we manage work, we want to understand what are the sets of rules that frequently get broken, why do they get broken, what are the possible solutions here. That's where we're here on the next left-hand column is what are some possible solutions. This is not an exhaustive list that I'm showing you here. This is just, for example, these are two things. I probably wouldn't even do just these two things. I would probably not just one time with a product owner. I would start actively coaching the product owner and actively coaching the team for expectations, to set expectations, something like that.
Yeah, I go even further, because I remember this conversation, or at least because this conversation has come up more than once in a workshop. Full disclosure, but one of those conversations was the fact that there didn't exist any agreement between the team and the developers as to how they were going to conduct their sprint planning, and what, as Rick mentioned, their expectations of one another. The product owner didn't feel that the developers needed them, is what I heard. And I'm like, wait a minute, you guys never expressed? No. Well, how do you then expect the person to show up when they don't realize that they're actually needed? Oh.
So the potential solution there could be talk about it and document what you guys intend to do.
Talk to each other, people. What a concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the beauty of this is a lot of times we'll get in a situation like you said that this isn't a retrospective tool, but I could see the retrospective fueling the dysfunction map, right? You're going to talk about the symptoms, and you're going to be accumulating those, and then it's through the conversations that you're going to start finding the answers. But there's been a lot of times where I've been in a situation where they'll have started with the symptom on the left, and they'll say, well, the answer has got to be the product owner's got to show up. And then they'll say why, and they'll say because Scrum said so, right? Yeah. But what they missed was the purpose, the thing in the middle, right? What was lacking because they didn't show up? What was the reason that they would have been valuable to be there? And then maybe we can convince them to show up, that showing up would be a useful thing.
Well, this is where assumptions get you in trouble, right? We always assume we understand what each other means by, hey, the product owner not showing up for sprint planning, that's what's causing the problem. Well, why? Because they're supposed to direct sprint planning? Why? Because they're supposed to come up with all the product backlog items that we bring in? Why? Because we're all assuming probably 5, 6, 7 different things. Oh yeah, of course it's the product owner. We don't know why. So it's a good point, Mike.
It sets the context for the discussion you need to have. By the way, if you run this in an Arabic-speaking country, I guess you have to run it left to right because their thing goes right to left. Just thought that was an essential point.
That was a very that's
your
very
sage
deep.
observation
Super
is
important to
noted.
keep in mind. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So
It is
one
noted.
thing about this, the way it's laid out, we slow them down by going right to left. But when you've got a finished map, does reading it left to right, does that drive people more toward, like, is the intent that you should read it from left to right, like a finished map?
It's
Or does it matter?
I think the right to leftness of it is just to slow you down to create the map. How you read the map may just be take a look at the solution that we've got and the measurements that we came up to make sure that the solution is or is not successful.
Yeah.
Just take a look at that end part. We've already figured out the stuff on the right. These 2 columns here on the left-hand side, those are going to be your most important.
It sounds like a Jedi mind trick. Like if you ever had a therapist say, "Hey, write out who you are, a paragraph, but use your non-dominant hand." So you can't
Yeah, I can
write
see
real
that.
fast,
Yeah,
right?
no,
like
I
you
could-
have to stop and you spend more time thinking about it because it's harder. That's
Yeah,
what it reminds me of.
I could see that because the thing is that for me, once you've made the map, if you're looping between solution and measure, the natural question would be: is it affecting the purpose? I sort of say not to emphasize thinking about the dysfunction and the symptoms so much as is the thing that we thought that should be being met, the purpose, the value of that being met. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, you should see the symptom go away, though, right?
You should, but you don't so much want to focus on the symptom from my perspective. That's my opinion.
It's more effective to think about the purpose because then
Correct.
something will come along for the ride if you're focused.
Correct.
Well, if we go back to the symptoms disease metaphor, right? You know you have attacked the disease correctly if the symptoms go away,
Fever goes away if the infection is still
right? So the same thing here, and yes, we have our measurements, but remember, solution is just a different word for hypothesis. So our hypothesis is true if all of those symptoms on the right-hand side start going away.
Solution is an action to test.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's as much as testing the map too, though, because what led you to that solution may be a faulty assumption.
You're right.
Right.
You're correct. The symptoms that you cited could be not the symptoms that you needed to assess to try to address the purpose.
Which I
So then the
suppose you could.
solutions.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so I suppose you could then use that as you say, well, we've had this hypothesis, we've got measurements that we're trying to check, and 3 of the 4 symptoms went away, but one of them is still clinging on there. So let's look back at that remaining symptom and talk about what else might be attributing to that or contributing
Yeah.
to that.
And part of the hope is that as you've started to work on this sort of stuff, other stuff may have emerged that didn't come up when you first built this map. Okay. In other words, as we say, is 3 months after you've built a dysfunction map, if it still looks the same, we did something wrong.
You're not trying.
Well, it's not that
Yeah.
you're not trying. It's we're not learning. Simple as that. You could be trying. You just be spinning your wheels.
Okay.
So I think I get this. Tell me if I'm wrong. So you start with the symptoms. You go through some root cause analysis, broadly speaking. You come up with a solution, which is a hypothesis for action that we'll take, that can be effective. And so then this is sort of the outcome. Maybe the outcome of the dysfunction mapping is a solution that goes into a larger PDCA planning loop where you say we're going to try this, we're going to test the experiment, we're going to see what happens. And then either it's fixed and we were right, or we've gotten rid of some of the symptoms, or maybe we've got some of the original and some other symptoms, and
Yep.
so that goes back into the next loop for the dysfunction mapping.
It-
Is that sort of a continuous process? Do I see that correctly?
Yes, or we've addressed it insofar as we can go for now, or whereby something else has emerged that has overtaken the
Yeah.
importance of the purpose of that, and we can sort of manage it. Okay, it's manageable having the product owner be more available to a certain point. Maybe
Yeah.
we're still not happy enough with their level of involvement, but we've got sufficient level of involvement that the pain, if you will, is manageable. But we've discovered this other thing, Matt, that's really now kicking us to the curb.
So Marcelo Lopez, there's no end to dysfunction mapping because otherwise we would be perfect beings living and working in paradise, right?
Who said that
We'd
there
have
was an
no
end to
problems
this?
and no dysfunction.
I mean, going back
Matt
to,
likes ends. He likes bookends. To
Well,
I like to see the
I
big
know you
picture.
like
The bigger
bookends,
the better.
but
What
this
is the
book-
net? Yes. that's
No,
me.
no. The net is that. Remember that private conversation we had, Mike, about the song that doesn't end
yes, it
From
just
the
goes on and on,
children's
my
show.
friend.
Don't start. Please
from
don't
Lamb
start.
Chop. This is the song that never ends. It just goes on and on, my friend.
Some
And I'm not
people
gonna
started singing it, not knowing what it was.
Yeah.
Anyway.
and now we keep on singing it just because.
I think we can see what dysfunction mapping is now, and we might have a new symptom. So this is awesome. I
Matt-
appreciate this. This is yes.
Matt, were you ever a fan of the show House?
I've heard of it. I didn't watch it.
Mike knows
I'm
what
actually
talking
watching it now. I'm on
Okay.
season 7 of 8. So
Okay.
we're yeah.
But every single episode was somebody comes in with a symptom.
true.
Let's treat the symptom. Stop treating the symptom. House was always about diagnosing things correctly. He was a diagnostician, right? So diagnose the problem, not the symptom. Don't take care of the symptom. And every time they thought they had the problem or the virus or the sickness or the disease, whatever, every time they thought they had it pinned down at about 20 minutes into an hour-long show, wait a second, that just caused a ton more problems. Yes, it's cyclical. We have to come back and look at the new symptoms. What new symptoms are we seeing? And do these new symptoms, are they part of a bigger problem? Remember, every sub-organization that we look at is a small cog in a giant superorganism or a giant system, right? So you tweak something over here in IT, and way over here in logistics something goes wrong.
Yep.
Okay, are they correlated, right? We got to start. I mean, as much as I don't like, and the reason I don't like it is just because it makes my brain explode. As much as I don't like systems thinking all the time,
Yes.
we're talking about systems thinking.
Yes.
Okay, wait now. He said he doesn't like it. You said yes. So are you saying yes, you don't like it either?
I love systems thinking. I
Yes.
naturally gravitate towards what is the big picture because my concern
Well-
is, oh crap, what are we not seeing that's about to kill us, right?
Well, you see, therein lies the rub. Okay, and I'm going to say either a very insightful or a very provocative or both sort of statement.
love it.
Part
It
of
wouldn't be a
part-
Marcelo Lopez show without that.
if I did.
How did we get through 44
okay.
minutes without it? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So part of what is possible, applying this tool called dysfunction mapping is what Rick just said. Okay, what was House trying to do? He was trying to help the residents become better diagnosticians. What is a Scrum Master there to help, or at least part of, there to do with their team and their organization in a broader sense? There's your systems thinking map.
So you're running a differential analysis. You're saying here, what causes this and this and this? You're role playing House the whole time.
Yes, you're being.
That's awesome.
Yes. In other words, yes, you're there to help everyone else become a better diagnostician around how do we build better process, better environment, better teams, better organizations, better products.
My understanding is the Scrum Master was originally supposed to coach the organization, which means they would need an understanding of these dynamics to
Oh, absolutely.
have-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I took a class from Ken, I mean, I had already taken the Scrum Master class way before, but I actually sat in a class with Ken, okay, and he was quite emphatic about that this Scrum Master position is not an entry level role. This idea of junior Scrum Master, that's hooey. They say in Texas, the southern output of a northern bound bull. You know, hey, only in Texas, man. Only in Texas.
Well, I mean, how does this relate to the thinking processes? Is Scrum?
The thinking.
There's a big picture that I'd love to get into.
Well, yeah. I mean, this goes back to things like what was discussed in the Knowledge Creating Company book from Takeuchi and Nonaka. Is part of this thinking was you remember how tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, it was a loop, it was continual, it never stops. It's never supposed to stop. Why? Because we're always creating new tacit knowledge that needs to become explicit, and so on and so forth. And it keeps. And I'm not going to repeat the song again, Matt.
Thank you.
I'm not going to repeat the song again. But it's like
You're not
that.
going to repeat the song again?
No, not going to do it. Not this episode. Not
I do
gonna
have
repeat
a
the
question though. Just because you go through the trouble of making a map doesn't mean you've correctly diagnosed the issue. To go back to the house
Correct.
analogy.
Correct.
Right. So you're going to propose a solution. One of the important things, and you touched on it, but I don't think you explicitly said it or put the two together yet, is the measurements that you're going to put into place to test your hypothesis. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we even though velocity is in our menu of measurements, we are not going to start with velocity, which I know every Scrum Master in the world, every product owner in the world wants to start with. Hey, let's measure it by measuring velocity, which we're already measuring. Stop it. There are dozens of other measurements that are much more valuable out there that'll show you what's really going on. If you just take 5 minutes, calm yourself down, start thinking about what impacts will your solution have. Start measuring that. I'm just looking at the 4 that we're from the dysfunction that we were talking about earlier. Percentage of unfinished work per sprint. I mean, that's easy to track. It's super easy to track. Number of new work items pushed into the sprint, mid-sprint.
Yep.
That's super easy to track. It's just a number. So it's not just knock it off with velocity. Velocity has its uses. It's not pervasive. Its uses are not everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
A different thing here. Okay. Not in the map, but one of the things that came up, I think, in a subsequent map that I think would hardly anybody would measure is the number of times we had to go back and refine a backlog item mid-sprint or sometime during the sprint. How many times did developers have to have a conversation about refining an item that they had already previously planned? And it wasn't because they didn't understand the how. It's because they weren't clear on the what. Okay? In other words, I didn't realize that we needed to do this on that server or to get that credential or create that certificate or etc. No, that's a how thing. It's the heck were we actually trying to do? The number
I didn't
of
understand what the
times-
customer really needed, is what
Right.
you're saying.
And then the question here is, how often do we actually do that sort of stuff? How often do we actually quantify the amount of post-planning refinements that developers have, even if it's just a 10-minute conversation that paused whatever was happening because something was unclear? Okay? And then how do you get developers who are used to clickety-clacking on the keyboard? I'm talking about, folks, the conversations that happen on Reddit about that say, oh man, I hate when my Scrum Master pulls me to have that. By the way, it's not talking about this sort of stuff and the impact that's causing us the pains. So developers complaining because the product owner's not there, because we're unclear about that, because maybe even though we did refine, we weren't clear on the what, but you're also complaining because the Scrum Master asks you to count how many times you have to pause to ask for clarifications. That itself is a dysfunction right there. Okay? And if we clarify this sort of stuff to developers, then maybe we can start building more resilient teams. It sounds counterintuitive. You're pausing. You're asking me to count something as silly as how many times I stop and have a conversation with Jeff about understanding what this backlog item means. And I go, yeah, because it's keeping you from being effective. Do you like continuing to do stuff that keeps you from being effective? I think the answer is no.
Well, ironically, that's why we wanted the product owner there every day, so that if this did come up, they were there for the least amount of disruption.
Yeah, and these are the sorts of things that I find that, I'm not chastising, but I'm finding that a lot of our product owners are dropping the ball on. They are failing to recognize what value they're leaving on the table by not having these kinds of conversations with their developers, which is why we come back to that. Even if you're a practitioner comes into one of these workshops, okay, Jeff creates this wonderful map. Great, go back and share it with your developers. Ask them, do you feel this stuff would help you if we did something about it together? Yeah, well, I don't like this and I don't like that. Okay, great, let's change it together.
So guys, you know, I think in my lenses, I see this as just, it's another tool, a learning tool to put in the box. But it's only going to be effective if you, A, learn from it, and B, take action on the things that are on the board. So it's not just the map itself. It's actually taking action and testing those assumptions to see, were we right or were we not right? But ultimately, what do we learn from this, right?
You know, I've been thinking about this for months now, and by months I mean like 6, 7, 8 months. I actually think that dysfunction mapping is, if not the newest, a new agile approach. Because if we take a look at extreme programming, depending on how you count, it's 12 or 14 different engineering practices that should be best practices for software engineers, right? This is a practice that should be best practices for any type of leader in an organization, especially in an agile organization. I think this is an agile approach. It's not a framework. It is not a process. Like Jeff said, it's a tool. I'm saying it's a practice.
Could be both, but depending on where you're standing.
But it is method agnostic is the
Yes.
other thing that
Yeah.
That's the
that
important
get
thing.
from you guys.
Yeah, I swear the fact that it just looks like we're applying Scrum mostly is purely coincidental, because, as I said, this particular team that I was referring to at the beginning when Matt asked me, well, where have you applied this? They weren't using Scrum.
Mm-hmm.
They were using Kanban. They just flowed work in, and they managed, pulling in stuff and then delivering stuff when they needed to deliver. But they needed a mechanism to assess how their process was working.
Do you have different versions of dysfunction mapping? One for Scrum, one for Kanban. Do you have to sort of have a loose? So
Do you have an unaligned version?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
Because you need to have an understanding of what the rules are that you want to examine, and if they're broken, is that what it is?
I listen to the participants. If I feel they're feeling scrummy, I leave it alone. If I feel they're feeling some Kanban in there, I leave it alone. I put it in there. If some of what they're saying is clearly telling my spidey sense that it goes back to fundamental aspects of the principles of Agile, I'll slap those cards in there and go, okay, where are we falling down?
So you need some sense of the rules or the things, the intention.
Right.
I don't know if rules are necessary, Matt. I mean, I can see using this. I've got a friend who runs a business. They have a antique shop, and they take a lot of consignment items in, and they find new things. And their goal is to try to sell items and get them out the front door, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it doesn't matter how they come in. But they're suffering from getting that stuff out the door. And so I could see taking what are the symptoms, what's bothering you, and they could come in and say, we're spending a lot of time cleaning up items when they come in. We're spending we're having a hard time getting customers inside the shop, right? We're not closing sales. I could see them taking those symptoms and having a conversation, working their way back to, well, what's our hypothesis about how to fix that? Like, what could we
Totally,
do
but at some
differently?
level, at least implicitly, there's some system where you clean stuff up efficiently, you get people into the shop efficiently. Like you have to measure what's broken against what is intended.
Yeah, haven't all antique shops gotten together and created an entire process just for antique shops?
Scrum for antique.
Yeah,
Scrum for
and
antique. I think we all know.
it's called dust. I don't know what it's called. Just
Well, it seems to me, though, that trying to come up with a map for a particular method, whether it's Scrum or Kanban, is kind of like, maybe I'm missing the point here. This is a wrench. This is not an oil filter wrench. It's not a pipe wrench. It's a wrench. And you use it for whatever you need to.
Yep.
And use it in the context appropriately. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing the point.
No. I put it this way. I've described it to some friends as effectively the Doctor Who's sonic screwdriver.
that's good.
It's a sonic screwdriver, man. It's multi-purpose. It's adjustable. It's reprogrammable, and you're the programmer at the hand of it, man.
All right. So I think this is externalizing something that we as coaches did internally in the beginning, when we were the only experts in the room about how an agile interaction should happen. We would look at the symptoms. We would devise what we thought the problem was. We would say what we think the solution is, and we would articulate that. And nobody saw the work involved. All they saw was our proposed solution. This is taking the process that happened in our heads and opening it up for the organization to do it for themselves. It's reverse engineering the map in our own heads. Right?
It's giving the power back to the people, if you want to say that. It's to
Yeah.
instead of the agile coach being responsible for solutions to problems, it's giving the control back.
Right.
Stop
Yeah.
looking at me. I'm the agile coach. I'm telling you what problems I see.
I'm not supposed to be the answer man. I'm supposed to be helping
the
you
method.
find the answers.
Yep.
The method man.
The method man.
Here's the thing.
The method man?
think that's
Do you know
trademark.
the method man?
Yeah,
I
we all
think he
know
might
the
already
method man.
exist in other
Yeah.
adjacent industries. Yeah. This has not just been an agile thing. This has been an organizational effectiveness show. I've been Matt Beam.
I've been Mike Markey.
I'm still Jeff Singleton.
I guess I'm still Rick Waters.
I'll always be Marcelo Lopez.
Thank you for joining. We'll see you next Sunday at 10 a.m. I'm pressing the button.
Sunday? Saturday.
Did you say Saturday or Sunday?
Saturday.
I don't know what I'm saying. It's your guys. Saturday. Next Saturday at 10 a.m.